Welcome to Encounter with Cayds, where the mission is to help and encourage us to encounter and follow God in all aspects of our lives, according to His truth and the truth of who He calls us to be. Hey there, this is Cayds. I hope that you're doing well, that you're having a great week wherever you may be listening to this from. And I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining me. I cannot believe that it's October. Can you believe it? We're 3 months out from the end of the year and another year being upon us. And if you are anything like me, these 3 months can be really crazy. Heading into Christmas can be quite overwhelming, a lot happening. I know definitely for myself that can be the case. And I've just been thinking about this recently, and I hope that maybe this would encourage you. We're going to get into Psalm 7 in a moment, but I know for me when things get overwhelming and busy, particularly at this time of the year, it can be very easy for good, healthy disciplines and habits to almost get thrown out the window, for things to just take over and consume the mind, and being busy with what we have to do and the things that are actually really good for us, particularly if we're talking about being a Christian, the really good, healthy spiritual habits that draw us close to God. They are so important, and it's so easy for them to go out the window. Whereas it's these times really where we need them the most. And so I'd love to encourage you, and I'm saying this just as much to myself, to really lock in on spending time reading the Bible, spending time in prayer, spending time drawing close to God, spending time in community, allocating the time to draw near to God so that He may draw near to you. It's so important. It's vitally important. And I know podcasts are great. Hey, I'm doing one. I'm in there. And there are podcasts I love to listen to, and it's great to listen to online sermons and different things. And they are great because there are so many people that God has really gifted with being able to communicate His word and engage that discussion. But these things will never be a truly adequate substitute, will never be able to adequately, fully replace the time that we spend with God for ourselves. We need to be in the Word for ourselves, praying to God for ourselves. We need to be owning our faith. We need to be owning that time we spend with Him. It's something I can absolutely be working on continually, and I reckon it's something we all can be, if we're honest. So all of that to say, do not allow other things to overrun the good, spiritual, healthy habits that God offers and encourages us in. Reading the Bible, spending time in the Word, prayer, sitting in silence, being still, meditating on what He has to say, drawing near to Him, seeing what He has to say to us and what He is communicating to us. So I hope that's encouraging. I hope that's maybe giving you some food for thought. But speaking of the Word, we are hopping into Psalm 7 today. So if you have a Bible with you, if you are able to open that up, if you're with some other people as well, how about you open to Psalm 7 together, and let's read it and see what it might have to say to us. So here we go. Psalm 7. O Lord my God, in You do I take refuge. Save me from all my pursuers and deliver me, lest like a lion they tear my soul apart, rending it in pieces with none to deliver. O Lord my God, if I have done this, if there is wrong in my hands, if I have repaid my friend with evil or plundered my enemy without cause, let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it, and let him trample my life to the ground. and lay my glory in the dust. Arise, O Lord, in your anger. Lift yourself up against the fury of my enemies. Awake for me. You have appointed a judgment. Let the assembly of the peoples be gathered about you. Over it, return on high. The Lord judges the peoples. Judge me, O Lord, according to my righteousness and according to the integrity that is in me. O let the evil of the wicked come to an end, and may you establish the righteous, you who test the minds and hearts, O righteous God. My shield is with God, who saves the upright in heart. God is a righteous judge and a God who feels indignation every day. If a man does not repent, God will whet his sword. He has bent and readied his bow. He has prepared for him his deadly weapons, making his arrows fiery shafts. Behold, the wicked man conceives evil and is pregnant with mischief, and gives birth to lies. He makes a pit, digging it out, and falls into the hole that he has made. His mischief returns upon his own head, and on his own skull his violence descends. I will give to the Lord the thanks due to his righteousness, and I will sing praise to the name of the Lord, the Most High. Now, there is a lot in this psalm, and we'll unpack some of the key things. But from what I can see, this psalm functions as a vehicle for people to call on God for help when they are unfairly criticized or persecuted. Again, trusting God is expressed in the situation at hand, as we see in verse 1, viewing God as a refuge. It's pretty clear in verse 1 to 4 that David is the target of some unwanted malice and evil. The trial and danger aren't a result of his own behaviors and actions, mind you. But it is interesting in verse 3 to 5 how he states that if I have done this, if there is wrong in my hands, that God should let the enemy end him. And I think David knew he was in no error. He hadn't repaid his friend with evil or plundered his enemy without any cause, as is described in verse 4. But the implication does seem to be that anyone who does those things can neither use this psalm to call on God's help in their troubles or expect God to follow through if they do. Now that raises a question for me personally, and maybe it does for you as well. Do you treat others as you expect to be treated? Do you respond to those who persecute you out of hatred and malice? Or do you follow Jesus' instructions in Matthew 5, verse 43 to 48, the instruction to love your enemies? There's a clear right and wrong way to go about things here. The actions listed in verse 4 are considered evil and not of a godly standard. There's a few other notable instances in the rest of the psalm as well. David calls on God to arise in his anger towards his enemies, also stating that God has apparently appointed a judgment, as we see in verse 6. Pair that with God is a righteous judge and a God who feels indignation every day in verse 11. His anger and indignation, particularly expressed here, are directed towards those who threaten God's people. Case in point, David. He is absolutely a righteous judge, that is, God, justified in his actions and anger, his holiness so immense, and his ways so above us. All people are ultimately held accountable to him. We see this in verse 8. The Lord judges the peoples. That will definitely hold true on the final day of judgment, where everyone's eternal fate will be determined by God. Now, just quickly on you have appointed a judgment. That phrase there. From what I've read, judging in the Psalms is often used to reference a saving action. Specifically, it's God's intervention for the innocent and oppressed. That can raise huge questions, I'm sure, around suffering, why God allows it, many very important and heavy questions. Now, there's the obvious answers like suffering being a result of sin, and suffering being used to refine us and draw us closer to God, a focus in 1 Peter particularly. But what I do know is that verse 9 alludes to God's larger plan. The evil of the wicked will end, they will be held to account, and God will secure the righteous for eternity with Him. That is what we're heading towards. All will be made up for, and God's justice will be carried out. While it might seem like a shorter reflection, there is a lot in this psalm and some really key points, as I'm sure you've identified, to really delve into. So interesting early on how we see that David continues to cry to God, asking Him to come to his aid, to deal with the malice and the evil that he is being faced with. And yet at the same time, there's that flip side. If I've done this, if there is any wrong in my hands, at the same time, there is an openness and a willingness to be humbled. Show me, God, if perhaps there's anything on my end I've done wrong. So often, we probably ignore this question. Do we treat others as we expect to be treated? Do we respond to those who persecute us out of hatred and malice, or do we instead follow Jesus' instruction to love our enemies? It's one of the most fundamental and important directions Christians are given. It's given by Jesus. It's incredibly important to show love and grace towards those who treat us unfairly, with contempt or malice, whatever it might be, is definitely easier said than done, but it is doable if we are bringing ourselves to God and asking us to help with it. Doesn't mean that it excuses everything people do. There are still consequences and lines and boundaries that must be drawn. But it's important that we do exercise this love that God calls us to put in practice and to put in place, and also at the same time to be open to seeing the possibility that perhaps there are things we do that hurt others, that aren't okay. Being open to that, being willing to repent and change our ways of that. So that'd be the first thing I'd really encourage you to delve into, to ask yourself that question. Do you treat others as you expect to be treated? Do you respond in a similar manner? Or do you follow Jesus' instruction to love our enemies? And the other big key point that I'd encourage you to perhaps discuss here that we see right at the end, we know that Jesus came to take the penalty of sin, to save us from the consequence of sin, which is eternal separation from God, that He secures eternal salvation for those who would choose to believe in Him, abandon their old human ways, and commit to living by His ways. That's what we're heading for, those who have been bought at a price by Him and committed to Him. And we have the promise that the evil of the wicked will end. But I'd encourage you to discuss a little bit, whether it's with a group or to explore this in the Bible with God for yourself. Do you really believe that God is going to hold all people to account, that God will secure the righteous for eternity with Him, that all justice will be carried out, that nothing will go under His nose, nothing will not be brought to justice? Do you believe that? Because I can tell you right now, the promises God makes about how He will secure the righteous how he will bring all to account, how justice will be carried out, are so many and plenty. And I know that living in this world, it can really feel oftentimes like justice is not being served and carried out. That it can feel like the enemy's just getting away with so much, that God's not doing anything. But there is a broader plan here. There is a broader picture that God has. And I'd encourage you, if you struggle with this notion, come to him now, be praying, asking him to work through the word with you, to show you his promises, and to give you an eternal perspective and hope that can only come from him. As Christians, we absolutely in this world need to fight against what the enemy is trying to do. We need to stand up for the innocent. We need to stand against the things that are not of God. We need to be his representatives in this world, bold, courageous, brave, fully reliant and dependent on God's strength, but not hesitating at any moment to bring his gospel forward and his truth, and to communicate the freedom that he offers, the way he calls us to live. We have a role to play in this, but at the end of the day, God is the ultimate power, and he is the judge over all things, and all will be brought to justice. So pray and ask him to give you that eternal hope and perspective, and to perhaps show you how he is wanting to use you in the world today to combat the forces of evil that are seeking to take people away from God for eternity. That's what I would love to leave you with. And I'd encourage you to go and read this psalm for yourself and see if there's anything else God's bringing out of it for you. But I hope that this has been a really impactful time for you. I encourage you to go and check out the other episodes with the other psalms if you've missed any of those. And I hope and pray that the week ahead for you is one where you draw close to God and where he draws close to you. Thank you so much for your time. I love spending this time with you. I'm so thankful that you're here. And I'm looking forward to catching you in the next episode. But until then, take care. God bless.